Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here, and in today's video, I want to discuss something that's been going on more and more in the past year in gaming. It's not necessarily something we've seen in the past couple of months because we haven't really had too many noteworthy game releases since really late fall of last year, but as we start moving into the time of year now in 2020 where we're going to be getting more and more game releases, going to be a lot more reviews coming out, and I've been noticing a trend that I'm not really a huge fan of when it comes to review scoring, and in particular, this is not necessarily a bashing of reviewers, which is an easy enough thing to do, and of course I've done it myself many times, but in this case I want to discuss what's going on with developers and how they are handling the public relations side of releasing review copies to various review outlets. And what I've been noticing is actually kind of odd because there's really no logical explanation for why any of these companies are doing this. But what we're seeing is they're giving review copies out with versions of the game that are supposedly not the polished version. They're not the day one version of the game. And they're giving these reviewers these copies of very buggy versions of these games. And we're seeing it with high profile games like with Ori and the Will of the Wisps this week, and we saw it last year with a game like Days Gone, and then these developers put out this massive day one patch that supposedly is supposed to fix most of the issues. Usually, I mean, let's be honest, they don't always fix all the issues. Ori is still having issues after their day one patch. It's still not perfect. People are having issues with save files and stuff like that. There's frame rate issues and other various problems, so the game certainly isn't perfect. But what's happening is these publishers and the developers are putting these review copies in people's hands, and then when the reviews come out, we're getting all these mixed messages. So like within the case of Days Gone that we saw last year, the technical issues of that game that were present in the review copy but not necessarily in the day one version of the game, which ran much better, the reviewers did not give that game the benefit of the doubt and in general scored it very low. And one of the main problems that people had with the game were the technical issues. However, this week I've been seeing the exact opposite thing happen with Ori and the Will of the Wisp, where pretty much every review that I've seen will mention some sort of technical issues, but then they'll try to assure the audience that all of these issues will be solved with a day one patch, because Microsoft, unlike what Sony did with Days Gone, Microsoft stepped out in front of it and assured all of the publications that they didn't really need to worry about anything and that all of the problems will be patched out on day one. Now, there's many different problems with what's going on here. First off, we have more and more single-player games. We used to see this a lot with multiplayer games, especially games as a service, live service types of games, but now it's happening with single-player games, which is kind of disturbing, especially these games that keep getting delayed and delayed, and then when they come out, apparently they're going out to reviewers and they're still not in a finished state. And instead of just pushing the release back just a week or so, we're putting out these reviews from all these outlets, which are kind of just saying, well, the developer assures us that this is not going to be a problem, so we're just going to slap a really high score on this, even though some people are having issues where the game just isn't saving for them, and until they actually die in the game, they don't realize that they haven't saved any progress for half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, or whatnot, depending on how long they played. Now, that's a pretty severe issue. Now, obviously, major save issues is one of the worst problems and worst type of bugs you can have with any game. That's right up there with having a legitimate game-breaking bug where you just can't proceed in the game because of some sort of glitch or error, maybe a door not opening or some area not unlocking that you can't get into, maybe an item doesn't appear that's supposed to be there, but stuff like that. But aside from that, save issues are really one of the, if not the worst issue you can have as far as bugs go. And so for reviewers to just go out and accept a company's word, even though it is Microsoft, major publisher, we can't necessarily take their word for it, same as any other publisher. We don't know if they're actually going to be able to fix what's going on. I mean, after all, in this case, Ori has been delayed multiple times, and in fact, it even got a late delay. It was supposed to be, originally it was scheduled just to come out a month ago, but they pushed it back again for polish. But then reviewers were handed a copy that clearly was not fully polished. That many of them mentioned it, but yet they slapped high review scores on the game anyway, just taking on blind faith that they're going to patch the thing out. And this is a problem, and I'm sure the problem is obvious because once again, This is a question of the corporate review sites, the people who get all the review copies early, are putting out a not fully legitimate and honest impression of the game because they're promising us that something that they haven't played will be fixed down the line just on the promises of developers whose primary goal is to get money out of our pockets still at the end of the day. Even though a game like Ori is available on Game Pass and whatnot, they're still trying to sell copies of the game. There's still physical copies out there, stuff like that. You can still purchase the game. It's not like everyone is subscribed to Game Pass. So, of course, they're trying to sell copies, and we all know they're trying to sell it on day one. So when the publishers and their publicists, specifically the liaisons that go in between the publishers and the developers and the media, when they're out there pushing this narrative and assuring everybody that everything is just going to be totally fine, I mean, it's just a bunch of nonsense. And we see time and time again that even with these day one assurances, that often everything is not fixed. As I mentioned earlier with Days Gone, in my review I mentioned this as well. They had a big day one patch that supposedly cleared up a lot of the issues that us as the public did not see, that reviewers had a problem with, and they very much held it against the game. Now, after all the patches came out and I had fully beaten the game, I got the Platinum Trophy for that game on PS4. But after I beat the game, I said in my review, my game files started getting corrupted one after another. Every time I would load a game, it would tell me it was corrupted, and I couldn't save it anymore, and I couldn't play it anymore. It was just a completely corrupted save. Now, luckily, I'm the sort of player that saves multiple different files, so I have like 10 save files for any game, especially an open world game like that. So I do still have some save files now. I don't know if the patch has been fixed now where I won't have corrupted files, but I just deleted the game now. I haven't played it in forever. But that was another situation where the reviewers did not get a copy of the game that had a day one issue. Now, I personally have to hold it against the game when it starts deleting and corrupting my save files through no fault of my own. Just randomly, as soon as literally within 5 minutes after the Platinum Trophy popped, the game shut off, and when I turned it back on, everything was corrupted. And all my previous files that I tried load weren't corrupted. So that's still an issue. So there's still technical problems there. But in the case of Ori, we're seeing the same thing. People are still reporting that the save bug that reporter were putting out in their reviews were talking about this. There was many reviews that did talk about that. I will at least give them credit for that. They did bring it up, but then they tried to turn around and smooth it over like everything was just going to be fine, and it's not fine because people are still having that issue, and that has to affect the review score at the end of the day. Technical issues, I'm sorry, have to affect a review score because you're buying a product. You can't only judge it on, oh, it's beautiful though and so artistic and the story is great. Of course, all that's important. The gameplay is important, obviously. But when you are having a game with massive technical issues, we are buying a piece of software here at the end of the day. You can't just try to ignore that. And this is the problem I'm seeing. Now, this is a situation where, and you know I rarely do this, but I do have to sympathize with people who do work for these corporate review sites in a situation like that because they're the ones who always get the early copies. And in this case, when they're getting handed review copies of let's face it, a dysfunctional game, a game that is not optimized and is theoretically not the version we're supposed to be getting on day one, even if a lot of the things aren't fixed, theoretically they are still playing a worse version of the game in a lot of cases. And like I said, we're seeing this more and more. So what are they supposed to do? Say someone takes all this into account and slaps a 7.5 on a game that ends up going down as a true masterpiece. Now, let's say this is the case with Ori. I'm certainly not ready to put a judgment on the game. I've played it for a few hours. We'll see how it goes. You guys know I don't put out my reviews until I actually beat the game and see what it all has to offer. So I'm not ready to give my judgment on the game just yet. However, what if someone, these people got to slap their name on this thing in perpetuity? It's always going to be on there. Well, so-and-so gave this game a 7.5, and what if it is a true masterpiece? Well, that's going to hurt their credibility down the line. Not that credibility for a lot of these sites is necessarily high anyway, but of course, that is something you have to keep in mind. On the flip side, what if you give a game a really high score, like we're seeing in the case of Ori on the flip side of things, and then it goes down as a game that maybe never actually gets fixed, that always suffered technical difficulties, and then you're the person who tagged a 10 out of 10 on a game with crippling technical issues, and you've just relied on the publisher or the developer's word from their PR team to tell you, though, everything's going to be fine, and you bought into it, and went along with it and slapped a 10 out of 10 on a game with crippling technical issues. And the really confounding thing, the thing that I really do not understand, is why publishers and developers would want reviews going out before the game comes out that will reflect on a bad version of the game. If you are not sending the best, most optimized version of the game out to reviewers, why would you even bother having a review embargo go live 3 days before the game comes out? I know all gamers would especially appreciate having early reviews, but we want reviews that are actually accurate and not future casting what the game might be if developers live up to their promises. Because I'm sorry, at this point, as an average customer, I don't have much faith in any of the promises that developers are telling me. So when I see all these high review scores coming out saying, masterpiece, best game that Xbox One has, all this stuff, and yet if you read further down into these reviews, you see, they've experienced very hard, very bad technical issues that can't possibly be present in a game that you're scoring a 10 out of 10. Now, I did see a few outlets here and there saying that they were going to refrain from putting a score on the game, but we all know that score that a lot of outlets did put out, that's the most important thing. Most people don't actually read a review all the way down to the bottom. They might glance at the first couple things, but then they just scroll down to the bottom to see what the pros and cons are, what's the bullet points that you hit, and then what's the final score you slapped on the game. And we all know the problem with Metacritic is that the etched in stone future of a game is determined within the first 24 to 48 hours of Metacritic scores going live. And with the ubiquitous nature of Metacritic itself and how important it is in so many people's minds, it's a real problem when we are seeing critic review scores going out that are not indicative of the game that they actually played. And that's basically the whole point of the video. Now, I know I don't usually cut up videos like this, and you might be wondering why you're seeing a lot of Crackdown 3 and some various other games. Well, originally this was supposed to be a video about Game Pass. I've actually had several different viewers ask me to do a video about Game Pass and some subscription services in general over the past couple weeks. So I've been thinking about that. I was putting together a video. I decided to scrap everything I had and put that out at a later date, but I still had all this video ready to go and spliced together. So I said, you want to know what? Let's go with it. I got a little bit of Ori in here, so it's somewhat relevant. So I apologize for that if that was a problem for you for showing Crackdown 3 on the screen, but that's just the way it ended up for this video. Anyway, that's it from me, Coach Toolshed. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to stay in tune with the channel headed forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11.